This is footage of Amsterdam in wartime, an empty, desolate city. Holland is occupied by Germany. The majority of Jewish inhabitants have been deported to concentration camps. A few have managed to hide from the Nazis in cellars and attics, harbored by friends and strangers. On the Prinsengracht, the staff of the wholesaler Opekta had hidden 8 Jews in an annex. One of them was Anne Frank. Her diary would become world famous. Miep Gies was one of 4 staff members who helped Anne Frank. In the early summer of 1942, Otto Frank, the manager of Opekta, called her into his office on the lower floor of the annex.
Ja.
Well, he rang me and said, "Miep, would you come in a moment, please?" I came in and he asked me to sit down. "I have something very important to tell you," he said. "A secret, really.
Een soort geheim eigenlijk.
We plan on hiding ourselves here, in this house."
Onder te duiken, in dit huis.
Are you prepared to help us
Om ons daarbij
with provisions and so forth?
met levensmiddelen te verzorgen enzovoort.
I said, "Yes, of course." I thought that it went without saying.
The Frank family came from Frankfurt am Main in Germany. Otto Frank and Edith Hollander were married in 1925. Margot was their firstborn, followed in 1929 by Anne.
Deutschland nicht geschenkt erhielten, sondern selbst nicht schaffen muss.
When Hitler and the Nazis came to power in 1933, they began to terrorize Jews openly. Alarmed by this race hatred, the Franks resolved to leave Germany and settle in Holland with their 2 daughters. In one of Amsterdam's new suburbs, they found an apartment on the Merwedeplein. Otto Frank became manager of the wholesaler Opekta in the city center.
I was hired in 1933. I thought I would start out in the front office, but that didn't happen. On my first day, Mr. Frank took me to the kitchen. He put fruit, sugar, and a recipe in front of me, plus the utensils with which to make it, and said, "Let's see you prepare this recipe." I worked a good month in the kitchen. I learned properly how things should be done. I learned what mistakes could occur and how to correct those mistakes.
En wat je eventueel fout kunt maken. En hoe je fouten weer goed kunt maken.
And then Mr. Frank said, "Take a desk in the front office. Start answering the phone. You're our public relations officer." Our product was popular with Dutch women who wanted to make jam in 10 minutes. They had to use a certain proportion of fruit and sugar, but often what they do was use much more fruit than sugar, and it would go wrong. Mr. Frank was a very refined man, a real gentleman.
Een zeer beschaafd iemand. Een heer, weet je wel, hè.
His wife came by the office once with Anne when she was 4. Anne was a bit shy, but she gave me a slight curtsy. She was very bright-eyed. I showed her around the office. I let her do some typing and have a look out the window. She loved every bit of it. She was a very lively child. That was our first meeting, quite brief. After a while, Mr. Frank invited me to his home for a meal. Naturally, it was quite an honor. I'm back in the house where Otto Frank lived.
Waar Otto Frank gewoond heeft. En waar ik vaak geweest ben.
I was here
waar ik
often.
hele leuke herinneringen
I
aan.
have fond memories of this place.
Het grijpt me meer aan.
This affects me more than I'd expected.
Weer in het huis te zijn.
Being back in the Frank family home where
Van de familie
I
Frank,
had been so
waar ik
often.
vaak geweest ben. Dit doet pijn, hè?
This hurts.
Dit is onvoorstelbaar.
This is unimaginable.
Je moet er eventjes
I have to
bij
collect
stilstaan.
myself and regress in my memories to
Je
that
laat
time.
even je gedachten weer
It
teruggaan.
could have all turned out so differently if we'd managed to pull through.
Het had zo anders kunnen zijn. Als we het gered hadden.
We had every hope that we would.
Ze zijn hier heel gelukkig geweest.
They were very happy here.
Allemaal.
All of them.
Anne was
Anne bristled with life. She was inquisitive. She had eyes that sparkled. By contrast, Margot was quiet and deferential. Mrs. Frank was friendly, quiet, and a bit reserved.
Een beetje teruggetrokken. En ja, meneer Frank,
When we were here,
als wij hier
Mr.
waren,
Frank always
met die
initiated
woorden
conversation.
aan tafel, die sprak
He
met
talked to
ons.
us.
Ik was natuurlijk
I was
zeer
quite
begroet.
delighted to be invited by the
Ik werd
boss.
uitgenodigd door de baas.
But Mr. Frank had a certain intent in doing that.
Want, kijk eens,
See, the immigrants who came here tended to be restricted to their own groups.
Weer aangewezen. Die hadden geen vrienden
They had
hier.
no friends
Maar
here.
meneer Frank
But
kon
Mr.
met de
Frank kept
Hollandse
company
vrienden
with two
aankomen.
Dutch
En
friends,
dat waren wij.
namely us.
En omdat ik zo'n interesse
Because
had
I
in
was
de
interested in
politiek en
politics
de
and
kantoor
had
altijd met
political
hem
discussions
sprak
with him in the office, he included us amongst his acquaintance and amongst his friends, albeit later.
Toen kwamen we op de
We
zaterdag.
had come around on the Saturday afternoon.
En daar kwam meneer Van Pels.
Mr. Van Pels was there with his wife,
Dr. Pfeffer.
and Dr. Pfeffer with his lovely wife,
En er werd de hele
and we
toestand
discussed the issues
besproken.
of the day.
De toestand over de oorlog.
We discussed the war and
hoe dat
debated
zou gaan,
this
hoe
and
dat zou gaan.
that.
Maar kijk eens,
But
die mensen
people
die
living
hier waren,
here
die voelden zich
thought they'd be safe.
Het was Holland.
This was Holland.
En we dachten allemaal.
We thought we'd just
zullen weer
stay out of it,
blijven.
like in
Net als
World War I.
1418. Niemand dacht
No
dat
one
wij
imagined that we
ooit
ever become the
slachtoffer
victims
zouden worden
of the
van
Nazis.
de nazi's. Toen kwam de
Then
10e
came the
mei.
10th of May.
Dat was een schok voor ons allemaal.
That shocked us all.
We werden opgeschrikt.
We were alarmed by the aircraft,
We wachten af.
but we waited and heard,
Toen hoorden we dat Rotterdam
eventually, that Rotterdam had been
een
bombed.
paar dagen. Nou, toen wisten we wel
We knew clearly what that would mean.
betekende. Als Nederlander,
A good Dutchman didn't watch the occupation force roll in.
wij zijn er niet naartoe gegaan.
We didn't
Wij
go.
bleven op kantoor.
We stayed at our jobs.
De angst
Eventually, our fear subsided a bit because the Germans were very pragmatic.
bekeken
They
hadden.
didn't upset things too much for the first 2 years.
De eerste 2 jaren deden
Didn't
niet veel,
interfere.
Dus dan kwam je weer bij.
That way, you
dat
could
je in elk
adapt
geval
and